This recording is in progress. We're going to be talking about the Code of Ethics this morning, and I love the Code of Ethics by National Association of Realtors so much. I'm trying to get it up on the screen for you guys. I'm going to go ahead and share it now. And when I was selling, I sold before I was managing. I sold for a good 13 years or so, and now I've been managing for about 7. I remember reading this once or twice. I actually did a big presentation to non-realtors about realtors and like what their place in the world was. And I read the preamble and I was like, this is so beautiful. Have you guys read the preamble to the Code of Ethics? It's something that like I found I wanted to read once in a while, like once a year or so. I'd read it and try to remember what the different codes are, because I'm a nerd and that's who I am. But just to put this into play, this has been what, 100 years. It's 100 years old, and they've changed it over the years. But hold on, I'm gonna try to put this. Hold on, I'm putting this on our screen so that I can do both at once. I'm not very good with the Zoom, but I want to be actually looking into the camera. There we go. Okay, so now I'm moving us back. There we go. Okay, under all is the land. Upon its wise utilization and widely allocated ownership depends the survival and growth of free institutions and of our civilization. Makes you feel pretty important about what we do for a living. We should recognize that the interest of the nation and its citizens requires the highest and best use of the land and the widest distribution of the land, like all about more people wanting to own homes, right? Widest distribution of land ownership. It requires the creation of adequate housing, the building of functioning cities, the development of productive industries and farms, and the preservation of a healthful environment. So imposing these obligations on us more than just what you get in another industry. We have grave social responsibility and a patriotic duty to which we have to dedicate ourselves. So all of these things, like other industries, don't have this kind of code, and it really does set it apart from what makes someone just a real estate agent who has a license and what it is that makes us different. So whenever people asking me that, well, what is it? Realtors, you know, they're all the same. They're all trying to rip people off. You know, people have this terrible idea of what realtors are out there because it just takes one, right? You have one bad apple in our area, we have like 2 bad apples maybe out of 400 people, but the name gets around and then people think, oh, that person did that once 10 years ago. And then they have this bad idea of what we all do for a living. But really getting back to this, if you ever feel down, you hear people talking about realtors in a bad way, or you're trying to understand like how we are separate from and just someone who happens to be selling real estate who isn't a realtor. I know in my area, almost everybody's a realtor who has a real estate license, but you go to like Denver or one of the more metro areas, you might have a lot of salespeople. They either work for the builder or they just aren't a realtor member. And so they aren't held to these code of ethics. So in reading this, I just think it's important to read it every now and then. And that's why I'm taking the time to go into the interpretation of the code as it relates to day-to-day life. So competency, fairness, high integrity, all these things, you can pull 2 words out of this and make your own mantra about what makes you different than the rest of the realtors out there. But this is something that we all have to kind of live our lives in trying to be the best that we can be, whether you're at the office or you're at home, you're always held to that higher code of ethics. So what I wanted to do today is I wanted to talk about some of the things that I don't have notes to go with, because every time I do this, I'm thinking of different stories that I've heard more recently where something might be brought up with the code of ethics, like, oh, this agent over in so-and-so office did this, and that's why it's important to know that the code speaks to that, and this is why we need to do it a different way. But if you have questions about like what's okay and what's not okay, or hey, I heard this agent that did that, please just break in. This does not have to be me just talking to you. But I am going to have this up on the screen so that we can kind of go through some different things. And it's a really long, you can see where I am in relation to the whole code. It's a long code. We're not going through the whole thing. I usually get through like a third of it and then that's it. But if there's a special part that you want to talk to, we can always jump ahead. And I'm just letting you know, I don't have like a strict, like we have to talk about a certain thing today. That good?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, so let me get my readers on. So duties to customers and clients, these are, I'm sure when you're a new realtor, you go to a class that, you know, code of ethics, but you also learn about how the code is written. But I wanted to first talk about duties and kind of how that works. So in my state, you have two different ways you can work with a person. You can either, as a client, you could either be a transaction broker or you can be a seller's or buyer's agent. And it doesn't matter how you're representing people. You always have to be super careful that you're treating the other. You have to at least be fair and at least be honest to the other party, even if they have no relation to you in the course of the transaction, meaning like you're not representing them. You just have to make sure you're being really careful about how you say things so you're not trying to take advantage of someone. And that's something that the different states boards, in our state, it's the Division of Real Estate, DORA, but it's a Colorado Division of Real Estate. They are super careful to make sure that you're not taking advantage of the public. Like, it's so important to never look like you are taking advantage of somebody. And that's why there are so many situations out there where you have to be careful it's not about what you did always, it's about how it appears to the public. So sometimes we do things that just because someone in the public might, it just feels kind of icky or it looks like they might take it the wrong way and it looks like it might be a little bit icky. So we just stay away from it altogether. I know in my office, more and more, my top agents are not doing double-sided deals. And when I am talking to my newer agents, I tell them, do not double-side a deal. Like, there is no reason you should be double-siding a deal. It's one thing if it's off market and you're just trying to get the deal done. But when you're dealing with, let's say you have a listing and a buyer calls and they want you to represent them as well, and it's a multiple offer situation in this market, and the buyer says, I want this house. I'm working with you because I want you to get this house for me. And you're actually going to tell them, we had a house close last week, $225,000 over list price. There were 18 offers. So are you going to be the agent that tells that buyer, if you come in $225,000 above list price, I guarantee you're going to get this home? Like, first off, you can't lead someone to let's say, you know, because you're the listing agent, what those other 17 deals were. So you can't go and tell them. You can't go and tell the 18th person, like, the highest bid is at 800,000. So if you come in at 805, I guarantee you'll have that. But also, it just looks bad to the public. The house closes, the buyer's friend is out to beer with them, and they say, you paid what over the ask price? Sure sounds like that realtor took advantage of you and got a lot more commission because you closed for higher. You know, like, it sounds bad that you're telling the buyer to come up that much higher than what list price is. So if you're not a part of the situation and you're just representing the buyer or you're just representing the seller, then you're trying to get your client to be the highest bid. It's just like, it's better for you to take a piece of that other side and refer it to someone else in your office than to do both sides. So those are the kind of things that every office is different and every manager is going to be different with what's okay and what's not. But it's all about just the way the public might look at something. And I would say something totally different in a different market. If this was just a market where somebody they call, they write an offer, it's been on the market a few weeks, nobody else has written an offer, yeah, you can do both sides. But it's just because the market is so intense right now that would be one example of it. And again, break in. Any questions? I talk fast, so if there's something you have a question about, just break in. It's no big deal. Okay, so deliberately misleading the owner. That's one I wanted to just touch on. So you have a house. It's so tough. I lost a listing once because it was, I had worked with a ranch. He had owned a ton of different ranches, but there was the big one, right? I sold off a lot of the smaller pieces he had, but for years I worked with this guy, and there was the big one that I was going to get one day. And this is 15 years ago. And it was $2.5 million, $3.5 million. I can't remember. I think it was $3.5 million. And I told him, no, it was 2.5, because I told him, you should list. I did so much research. I knew so much about properties in this area. And I had taken over an hour, hours to know the property and to understand, there's a little bit of a gravel pit over here. This is irrigated, this isn't, and this is the part that's hayed, and this is alfalfa, but this part's mountainous, and you have a electric line that runs across it, so that's going to drop in value. And there's a river, but it doesn't really run through the property, so that doesn't give it value. I told him 3.5 million you listed, or 2.5, whatever it was, 2.5 million, and it's going to sell at 2.2. 2.5 million, it'll sell at 2.2. That is the number, right? So he said, I want 4 million for it, or 3.5 million, whatever it was. He came in and he was like $1 million over. And I was a newer agent, I'd been in the business a few years. And I said, God, Bryant, I can't do it. That's just, it's not the market value. But he knew this was his last ranch, and he wanted it. He wanted to say that he had a $3.5 million ranch. He didn't have a $3.5 million ranch, but he wanted it to be on the MLS for that. And I couldn't mislead him. I said, Bryant, you know me, I would never mislead you. Like, this is not what it is. And we had this other agent in town who was trying to build his business. He now owns one of the major brokerages in town. But he was going behind the sign. So he was approaching my seller, even with my other listings that I had, and said, I could sell that for more money. She doesn't know what she's doing, right? And he got the listing, and it was fair. I mean, he told him what he wanted to hear, and he told him, I think he listed it like 4 million, some insane amount. That thing went under contract like that, right? And what did it sell for? It sold for exactly what I told him. Exactly what I told him. And I was right. And the guy came and he said, I should have listed with you. But I lost out on like 100 grand, right? So I still think about that and said, should I have just done what he wanted? But I didn't want and that's like, I'm not saying that everybody should do that, but I'm just saying you have to be careful that you're not telling someone what they want to hear just to get the listing. There's the point that that it's high in this market. Maybe the seller's right. Some of my top agents don't even know. Is it right? Maybe the seller's right. I don't know. Market's crazy. Some of these houses are going for $200,000 above list price. So how can you say that seller's wrong? I don't know. But if you know it's wrong, if you want to get the listing, you can always say, look, if it's not, I'll take the listing. I know, I'm telling you the house is worth 400. It's going to sell for 400. It might sell a little bit above because the market's kind of pushing up, but I'm not going to take it any more than 450. I'm just not. And if you list it 450, we need to have an automatic price reduction in there that's going to get it at least down to 420. I'm telling you, it's only worth 400. I'll take it up to 450, but 420 is the max. That it has to come down to after 6 weeks. If we don't get the showings, we don't get the offers. Don't just say there's nothing worse than seeing that agent that always misleads the customer and tells them what they want to hear. They have the listing come out for way over list price. And then, okay, in this market, you're not seeing it as much, but in a normal market, you might see that same house. They just listed at 500. How would that feel to a seller if you had the rest of your life figured out because someone told you like $100,000 more than you're actually going to get the house, because either they didn't do their homework or they just wanted to get the listing. And then a week later they go, it's not working out. I think we need to lower it to 400. It's just so unethical. And it's so sad to those sellers that have to go through that emotional roller coaster, right? Of having been told something that wasn't true. So just be careful in practice that I'm not telling you to not take the listing that's a little bit over, but it's not fair to be able to represent that in public and say to a buyer, like, how does that make you feel if a buyer calls on it and they're like, so how do you feel about the price? It's so much better to be able to send the comps to them and say, these are the comps I used to price it and the market's going up. So we're pricing it a little bit higher than the last sale. And that is what it is. And then you zip it. But to be able to say like, oh yeah, it's a great price. Like, you can't say that if it's overpriced. You have to be real careful. Does all that make sense in practice? It's real complicated because you want to get the listing. So I'm just, there's a balance there, right? So talk to someone else in your office. If it's hard to talk to somebody else in your office because you don't want them to know about the listing before it's listed, but talk to your manager, talk to your employing broker if you have more questions than that. Okay, so it's the same thing, yeah, with represent. So, and then about like the whole full disclosure. So just be real careful if you're doing both sides. This whole thing, in Colorado, we have a form, and I'm sure you have a form in every state. Ours is called the brokerage disclosure to buyer, brokerage disclosure to seller. So if you have a for sale by owner, you got to hand that sheet to them before they open their mouth. Hey, in Colorado, we got this disclosure that I have to give you by law before we come and see your house. And it says that I am representing that buyer, and whatever you say will be used against you. You know what I mean? Like, you're telling them, I'm not representing you. Please don't tell me anything that I shouldn't hear. And it's the same with a buyer. If you can work with both sides, but if you're not working with both sides yet, you don't have a buyer's, some sort of buyer's agency or disclosure done, you want to do that at the first possible opportunity before that buyer opens their mouth. You're representing the seller, let's say, and that buyer opens their mouth and goes, oh my God, this is the house of my dreams. I want this. I don't care how much it'll cost. So you have to let them know, like, look, in our state, these are the different ways you can be represented. Right now, we have no relationship, and I'm working for that guy over there. So I'm just letting you know I'm allowed to let you into this house, but you might want to be careful when of telling me things that you don't want my seller to know until you are in a relationship with me. And in that case, once we have a relationship, I can't tell my seller the stuff I'm learning in our relationship over here, and I can't tell you what my seller has told me that is confidential over there. So they're both confidential. Now in Colorado, I'm assuming it's the same everywhere, that the only things that aren't confidential, if you have relationships with both sides, and if one of the parties can't do what they said they're going to do. So you have a relationship with a seller, and then you're working in our state, it would be called a transaction broker. So you can do both sides. It's not dual agency. You can't like give both parties advice of how to get a better deal. You're just putting the deal together, right? So the only things you are allowed to tell the other side is if that buyer said, I'm going to offer 300. I can't close on that amount, but I was going to wait till later in the deal. And then I'm going to tell him this, but it's really not true. So if somebody's lying, obviously you have to come up and say, look, I know this buyer just wrote this offer. He made me write it up, but he can't really perform on what he's telling you. Okay. So those kind of things, you really should just refuse the buyer or seller that's trying to make you do that, because you don't want to be involved in a bad deal. But I'm letting you know there are certain things you have to disclose if you're working with the other party, or somebody's trying to cover something up. Like if the law is a certain thing that you have to disclose something and they're saying, oh, don't tell the buyer about that. Like you have to say it. So again, you want to talk to that seller and say, you know, we actually have to disclose this. So if you don't want to disclose this, you're not working with me. I'm not the one for you, because I don't want to be involved in any sort of lawsuit down the way. Okay. Wow, I didn't know that this was all highlighted. I wonder if I did that. Oh, okay, let me see. This is a tough one. You're going to want, if you're working with a seller, you have to be careful if you're getting extra offers. I know it says you shall commit to submit any new offers or counter offers. So that just means if you're getting an offer, you're almost closed, and you get an offer that's like $100,000 more. Don't in any world think you can just keep that from the seller and not tell them. You just have to keep giving them the seller. I know when we're dealing in a terrible market, what you get is you get short sales, get a lot of short sales, and short sales are so hard to get closed. So there's agents that work with short sales. They work with foreclosures. Foreclosures are easy for me. I mean, I don't think they're that hard, but short sales are really hard because you're dealing with the actual seller who's losing their house. You're dealing with the bank. There's all these layers. And so sometimes you keep getting these offers in, even though you're trying to get this one closed. And you know, if the listing agent knows that if they get a new offer, the bank's going to go, well, maybe I should pull from this one and go with this one. And because of all those layers and all these other people that have rights, like the buyer can actually get out of the sale, even if they're close to closing, with all the laws that there are to protect homeowners from foreclosure. So sometimes you get listing agents that say, they'll say, I'm not going to give the bank this offer. Like, we're already under contract. We're almost closed. Hey, Heather, I know you have first position. I did get another offer last night. I'm not going to send it to the bank because I want to just get you closed. And you're like, oh, well, that's not ethical either, to just hold back an offer. So just be careful if you get yourself in a weird situation like that. It also works the other way. So If you are a buyer, this is a super sticky situation that you get all the time in my office. And you have a buyer who's under contract on something and something else comes up on the market. I know as an agent, oh my God, that is the hardest thing. You see the new listing pop up and you know your buyer wants to know about it, but they're already under contract on something else. It is not good faith for that buyer to go out and look at another. I'm guessing that all of you in your respective states have good faith clauses in your contracts that say, like, you have to have good faith and actually work to closing. You can't be playing the field, so to speak, and not tell other people that you have offers out all over and you have 3 houses under contract and you're going to terminate 2 halfway into it. Like, you can't do things like that. So when you have a buyer under contract and there's another house that's out there that you know they're going to want to see, I'm letting you know one easy way to go about it is remove them from the auto notifies. Like, you know, you all have your buyer set up on auto notifications. As soon as they go under contract, take them off of that. So at least it's a little harder for them to see the new listings coming up. But if there is a new listing, the code tells you the way you need to act is you need to terminate the one you're under for. So let's say there were 18 offers, you got the house, and now your buyer wants to go see the house down the street. You really are supposed to terminate this one before you go and pursue another one. Okay. So there are some exceptions. Let's say there's actually a reason, like you want to do research to make sure you put the right kind of price on the offer that you did. Like, let's say you offered 300 for the house you're under contract for, and there's a new one that comes out at 250 and your buyer's like, oh my God, that was like 50,000 less. I have to see what's going on with that house. I guess I could say that you're doing research to make sure that you're making a good decision on this one. There aren't many other exceptions. So you have to be super careful. I had somebody in this office this week that was telling me, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening, but there's this other house and I know this house they're under contract for is not going to work out, but my God, I don't want to terminate it. And then they have like 3 backups, or, you know, there's all these people want to write backups. So how do I do that? Should I just see the house and decide if they want to go for it and then bail on this one the second they know? Because then how do you, that's not an out in the contract. You know, I doubt there's any state that has an out in the contract that I decided I liked another house more. It's about inspections or appraisal or loan or the HOA. It's not about like, I just want the house next door. So we did have somebody who lost their earnest money and they gave it up willingly because they were waiting on a new build in a subdivision. And the house next door that was already built came up for sale. So they are months into the contract and they want to buy the house next door. You better believe that this seller is going to find out that they're the ones that closed on the house next door. So they can't in any rightful mind go and terminate on the house they're under contract for, put the other one under contract and think they're not going to get some sort of lawsuit against them, right? So they gave up, they talked to the seller. They said, look, you keep extending when this is going to close. It's been a lot more months than we were expecting. We could terminate because of that, but because we're buying the house next door, we want you to know, and we'd like to offer to give you half of our earnest money if you'll just let us out and close on this other house. And they ended up coming to a deal, you know, and the seller was a jerk too. So the fact that they took some money instead of insisting on taking the whole thing was not that bad. Does that make sense? I mean, this is all really complicated stuff, but it comes up every day. Getting into the obligation of Realtors. Yeah, these are just ones you just have to be really careful about what you can and can't say. So on client disclosure, again, it's already almost 10:30 and I told you I'm not going to get to all of this, but on client disclosure, be real careful about, you have sellers in a nasty divorce and they have to sell. Okay, let's take this market out of it. We're not in a market that has 18 competing offers and no one cares why the seller is selling because they want the house. Let's say it gets back to normal and you have one offer that's coming in. Every buyer wants to know why the seller's selling. And you have sellers in a nasty divorce, and that's why they're selling, because they need the money. So I have a question in my buyer checklist. If you guys ever want a buyer checklist, I do a whole class on it. I can send it to you. I have it posted in my office on IQ so people can grab it. One of the, or not buyer checklist, it's on the seller checklist. What do I tell the buyers why you're selling the house? Question's going to come up. So if you say, they're gonna know it's something, right? You have to have permission with whatever you say. So you might as well ask the question ahead of time to the parties who are getting the divorce. And if they say, I just don't know what to say, something I was taught by Oliver Frascona was, who was an attorney, real estate attorney in Colorado. He said, my sellers want the money more than they want the house. And he did it in a funny way that people would roll their eyes and go, oh, okay. And they move on. So if you really have no reason, then ask if that's okay that you say that. Otherwise, let's say they're divorcing and both parties are moving away. Just say they're actually moving out of the area. That's true, right? That's always true. So you're not lying, but you do have to have something. You can't just go and make something up.
Hey, Heather.
Yeah.
I'm planning to go door knocking tomorrow for like an hour, and I'm gonna try and communicate to people that answer their doors that this house sold down the street a couple weeks ago. Is it unethical to tell them that the house sold or went under contract for over the listing price? And is it okay to share that info or no? Or do I need to ask the buyer if it's okay if I tell the
It's
neighbor?
closed.
Yeah.
I think that's all public knowledge.
Okay.
Because if someone did a search on Zillow, they would see what it was on the market for. And then if someone did in your area, is there any reason that you can't search solds? I know there's some areas that still hold that private. If you have a public records database where you can look that up as a consumer, like on your assessor site, then it's public knowledge. I do know there's a couple towns that don't let you do that, but I bet it's public knowledge, don't you think?
Yeah, I think so. And then also,
so then you're fine.
Okay. And I can say that if it's priced right, that it could sell their house really fast.
It's all about the price. So I know even in my office with agents that have been doing this a long time, if they're going like 10,000 over what it really should be, it's totally quiet. They'll get a ton of showings, but they're not going to get an offer. But if you price that just right, that's what it takes. And that's why you need a realtor. You need to be able to just perfect that. And that's what happened with the agent I had that got the $225,000 above list price offer, is because they are so good at pricing. They priced that right. And everybody's just in shock. Like, how did that tear down sell for 800,000? But it's because they did that. So yes, door to door is fine. If you wanted to, I've also done just sold postcards, whether I'm on the list side or buy side. If I'm on the buy side, I will ask my buyer and say, hey, I'm going to send out a postcard to announce that you moved in. I'm not saying I'm trying to get new listings. I'm saying, hey, I'm doing a postcard to just say, hey, welcome your new neighbors. They're up in 225 Aspen Drive. And then what I'd say is it okay if I use your first names? But I would never say, I've learned over the years, you don't put the kids in there. So I always thought that was friendly, like, oh, and the kids, welcome Emmy and Maddie and the kids. And then I realized, oh, okay, don't mention kids in it because of like just bad people out there. So instead you just say, is it okay if I use your first names? And they always are like, oh yeah, I don't care. And so if I'm on the buyer side, it says, please, the house was a 4-bedroom, 3-bath house sold for $585. Please welcome your new neighbors, Mark and Chris, or whatever. You know, like it looks friendly, like I'm not just trying to get new business, but it also says, please call me for your market analysis today or something. But if I'm going door to door, you have no problem saying that. You just don't want to say anything about, obviously about kids. You don't want to say anything about like their personal stuff, but what the list price, what the sales price is, those are public knowledge. It's not public knowledge if they had a loan. So if they ask you questions about the financing or anything like that, I'd say, you just say, oh, I don't know. I'm not sure. Not sure about that.
Okay.
Is that good?
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks.
Good for you doing door knocking. That's awesome. Client's consent. Yeah. This whole thing about confidential information, it should be pretty obvious. You just have to be careful. I had a seller's relationship with my listing. I knew a lot of stuff about them. My listing expired. Now I'm representing a buyer and they relisted with somebody else. So I've got all this knowledge up here about the fact that they're getting a divorce. I know what their bottom line is. I know that all that stuff, but I was in a relationship with those people and we had a contract. So even though I have a buyer and I'm trying to win the listing, I can tell them, you know, the market is telling us that we should probably come in somewhere around here in our offer. What do you think, right? But I can't go and tell them I know what their bottom line is because I had a piece of paper signed with that seller back then. If you happen to just hear it, it's a small town and you know so-and-so and they know the situation and you didn't have the listing and you are a buyer's agent or you're supposed to be working only for them, then yes, you can tell that buyer everything you know, because it was just, you say, look, it's hearsay. I just heard it off the street, but I heard that they happen to be having a nasty divorce. So I don't know if it's true, but I'm working for you, buyer, and I have no relationship to the seller. So, you know, maybe ask around to your friends and see if you can find out any more. Does that make sense? So it's all about the piece of paper you signed. If you had a sign, then you have you can't consent to like tell anything. And this whole court order, oh my God, I've taken a class just in that stuff to know what our rights are. Hopefully you'll never get dragged into court for stuff like that. But if you are, then you have to say what happened. Okay, that's competently managed. Due diligence. This is just means lock the door on your way out. If people aren't locking the door on the way out, check that they lock the door on the way out, things like that. Just be careful of people's stuff. Compensated. Oh, must advising. Yeah, this is just talking. Yeah, I don't think anything like that is really important. Compensation, company policies against. Yeah, you want to be open about the commission. And that comes up a lot when I have a house listed and they're only offering or I don't have the house listed. Somebody else has the house listed. I'm showing my buyers. We have a buyer's relationship where they're supposed to, let's just say it's 3% and the seller's only offering 2.5. I have to disclose to them, look, if you buy this house, then you're on the hook for a 0.5% of my commission. Just letting you know, you can't take kickbacks from people if you make money because you're giving a client Vacasa's name, or you're giving a client a contractor's name and they're going to treat you to a nice dinner. They're going to give you $25. You can't take it. Like, don't take that money. Give it to your client. Say, hey, I got $25 because I gave you Vacasa's name. Here's the money. You just don't want to be caught in RISPA stuff. Yep. You never ever give out a lockbox key or a code to anyone unless the sellers are aware. You always set up showings and don't just like say, well, I have a lockbox, so I'm just going to enter that house on the way home and not call anyone. I know it's vacant. Nobody's going to care. That's all breaking and entering. We've actually had people who got in trouble for breaking and entering because the seller had what are they called? Nest. They had the little video box and knew that the person entered the property. You don't want to exaggerate. You can always say, oh, it's such a nice home and it's like falling apart. That's okay. You just don't want to be saying like something that's, you got to actually tell people what's going on with a house. Make sure. I've definitely reamed out a few agents who weren't open and honest about a house's condition before I drag a family out to it. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe you put me through that. Like, I would never have gone to see that house if I knew whatever horrible thing had happened in that house. So make sure that you are never signing for your customers. That's one that just says about like naming a false consideration and things like that. If you have a client that you know their wife is out of town and suddenly you sent them the amendment and that you get 2 signatures back all at once, you say, okay, we have to make sure your wife is actually the one signing this. Don't sign for someone else in the party. And don't you ever sign for anyone in your party, even if you know they're on a boat in Aruba and they're really trying to get the document to sign and they can't figure it out and it's just not working because they're on their sailboat and they go, Todd, will you just sign this thing for me? Don't do it. Like, never, ever, ever do it. That will always come up in court. You always think of what will happen if I am in court and someone is saying, well, Todd just signed that thing for me. He never gave me the chance. It's like, oh my God, you're such a liar, but you just don't ever want to put yourself in that situation. Okay. Yeah, this whole, that happens in Vail a lot, but let's say about,
I was going to say, I bought a house in the middle of the Pacific Ocean.
You did?
Yeah.
Was that a pricey thing, or was it back in the day when you could do those things for cheap?
No, it was a $1.3 million house I bought for myself.
Wow. You're the only one on this call who's done that. I'll tell you that much. Or that I've ever known. Do you still own that property?
No, I sold it a couple years back for 1.8. So
Good for you. That's awesome. Let me see if, okay. Okay. I wanted to get down to 3.5. We're almost there. This is, just make sure. Okay. I have a, if you're have a buyer's agency and you need to make, your agency says 3%, I'm going to make 3%. And you're showing someone 12 houses and all of them are at 3%, except for one. And that one's at like 0.75%. Don't ever go to see all those houses and say, they're not going to like that house, because they're going to like the one that gives you less commission. And then you never want to get in a situation where you're telling the customer after the fact, oh, by the way, you owe me for 2.25% if you buy this house. So you kind of got to eat it at that point and say, okay, I'm not going to have the conversation, because you don't want the buyer to fall in love with something. And then afterwards, you just have to be real careful about compensation, that you're not letting it get in the way of the house, of the person buying the house. Be very clear when you're working with someone what things would cost. Okay, 3.5. This is real important. I had a situation, so disclosing pertinent facts. I had one yesterday that was, you had a survey, that something fell out of contract. We have a survey. Oh, did it fall out of contract? No, it had closed last year. It's back on the market already. There's a survey and an inspection. And the house was in pretty good condition. Let's say it wasn't in good condition. Let's say it was in terrible condition, and the inspection was going to bring up a whole bunch of negative stuff, right? So do you have to disclose those two things? Absolutely. Everything goes to the new buyer. If you have a seller who throws everything out after closing, they're in a better place because they threw it out. They don't have it. They might know about the problem. So if they know about it, they have to disclose it, right? They have to disclose it to that buyer. That is the law. But if they don't remember what was on it, then there's nothing to give that buyer. But if you have the little old lady that kept all of her documents for the last 40 years, that goes to the buyer. If they still have their old inspection that has nothing to do with the house anymore because it's 20 years old, you have to give that to the buyer because they have it in their possession, and it might have things on it that would, this is the way you think. Is there anything that could be on this disclosure, or is there anything that you know that might be a reason that the buyer would want to get out of the contract or would not want to buy this property? And if it is, it has to go to the buyer, okay? So my person yesterday had a survey and he had an inspection. Those have to go to the buyer. But do you have to give it to him before the showing? No, not at all. I said, put the survey up. As long as there's nothing negative on it, put it in the MLS so everybody has access to it before they show the house. Now, after they've seen the property and they say, hey, I want to write an offer, that's the point where I send them the inspection. Personally, that's when I would send it to them, because I'd say, hey, I want you to have a clean offer. Here's the stuff that was on this house last year. And here's the notes on the side of everything my seller already cleared up, right? I'd prefer to do it before I get the offer. Now, but it's the seller's choice. If the seller instructs you, I don't want it to go to them until they're under contract, that's fine. You just have to do it right away. You go under contract, you give them the old inspections. Here's all the old inspections. Here's everything we have on the property, right? That's all you have to do. Just hand it over, right? It's just the law. That's what you have to do. So if you have someone that's trying to hide something, you probably don't want to work with them. I hope that makes sense. The pickle that we got in a few years ago, oh my God, this agent had been in business 30 years and she was such a good agent. She had something under contract and they got a survey. And it showed that the entire driveway was zigzagging on and off the property. Like, this is $1 million house, and the septic system and half of the driveway was off the property. So she didn't tell the buyer. She was trying to clear it up and get an easement for all the problems without telling the buyer. And then she was going to present it all to the buyer before closing. So she was like, oh, well, yeah, we got the survey a few weeks ago and it wasn't really good. So we're working with this neighbor right now and we're trying to get it cleared up so that we can just tell them we did it. And I was like, oh my God, no. Like, there is a point where you have to give that information to the seller. And it was way past all this person's deadlines to get out of the contract. So you just cannot keep information back from the buyer. Does that make sense? Disclose. Sarah? Were you about
What
to ask?
what happens if like something happens after all the inspection has been communicated and you're basically like waiting to close and something occurs?
Well, I love that you asked that because it's always different. So we had a one last week that was past its inspections. And then magically you find out that the property wasn't 6 acres. It was actually 4 acres, like a major problem. So there's all sorts of case law that has to do with, okay, what if it's this? What if it's this? Like everybody always sues everybody, right? But what I would do if I was a listing agent is tell my sellers, I know we're past all our deadlines, but you better believe you better give that person more time to deal with this issue. And if you don't amend it, you are going to see a lawsuit after closing, or this person might bail on the contract. So contractually, I don't know. Every contract's going to say, like the Colorado contract will say, if the house burns down before closing, but it's only 30% of the house, then you still have to close. But if it's 70% of the house, you don't have to close. So they have like, what if the house is condemned? What if the house is this? If it happens in the contract time, right? So your contract will determine what happens, but I'm letting you know as a listing agent, just tell your sellers, please give them more time. You don't have to give them weeks and weeks to think about it, but at least give them a couple of days to just sit and think about it and make sure they're comfortable with it. Because otherwise it looks like you're pushing them, and it's going to send them to an attorney to go say, you know what, we want to get out of this. You're just going to end up with a lawsuit. I've seen so many lawsuits over my years that it's not worth it. Make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. All of these kind of ones go into the same thing where you're just being really careful. One thing I want to bring up, okay, so since we're probably wrapping up soon, just know there's so much more in here that we could have like weeks of talking about this, but I want to talk a little bit about fair housing because we have had in Durango back, and I've never had this happen while I've been a manager, but we used to have fair housing. The national government organization would send fake buyers into your marketplace, and they are particularly pushing you for information to see. It's kind of like the policeman that dresses as a drunk person who's passed out in a subway and they have fancy jewelry on to see if somebody's going to steal the watch. It's kind of the same thing. Fair housing will send people into workplaces, or they have in the past, where they'll be like, so what neighborhoods, let's say I'm a white person and I want you to send me to the neighborhood where that only has people like me in it, that kind of thing. So they're not even real buyers, but the fair housing group is trying, the government is trying to kind of put the feelers out there to see if you're going to feel bad and you want to help the person and you're telling them things that you shouldn't say. So be really careful when you're in a situation where you're in a car with somebody and they're trying to get you to tell them information that they could probably find on a census somewhere. If you choose to work with a customer that's really pushing you for that sort of thing, do you hear what I'm trying to say? If someone's trying to discriminate and they're saying, so it's not only about you not working with someone, I'm saying there's somebody that wants to actively like get you to discriminate in where you send them to websites that they can check out that information. You don't go, oh yeah, you don't want to be over here. You don't want to be in this neighborhood. I think you'd be more comfortable over in this neighborhood. Be really careful about how you talk to that. And once it gets into a protected class of the information they're trying to dig out of you, you send them to the census. That's what I've always been taught, is there's census information out there that you can look up everything you want to do. But I just don't know. I'm just not sure about that. So change the conversation and get it away. But you could tell when the people were in the office because the questions they were asking were so obviously, it was almost as if they were setting up the situation. And you'd have the agent come down and say, I think that was one of the fair housing people that was trying to see if we were doing a good job or not. Does that all make sense? Do a couple more. Then I will. Okay. Is there anything else really good in here that I had a note by that I wanted to go into? There's so much good stuff. Okay, Lindsay's mailer, 16.6. Let's go back. I'm going to go all the way down. I had a person when Realtors, okay. Future agreement. Okay, let's just talk about that and then we'll go. When is it okay? When is it crossing the sign and when is it not crossing the sign? If somebody has a mailer and you send it out to everyone in a subdivision, and you have a disclaimer on it that says, this is not intended to solicit currently listed properties. It's one sentence. It can be really tiny. You send it out to everyone in a subdivision. It doesn't matter if they're listed or not. If it's easy enough to pull out the people who have their house listed, let's say it's only 30 homes and you know there's one listing in there, just pull out the one listing. You don't have to if you have that little disclaimer, but you can't go purposely trying to target a certain area because you know their realtor's a jerk and they should leave their realtor and the realtor isn't doing a good job anyway. I'm going to just target the whole area, but I'm going to happen to send a mailer to that house hoping that they call me, right? You also have to be careful that you aren't setting up a situation where you're reaching out to anyone that has a current listing. You don't ever want to say something negative about the worst agent in the county. You want to say, oh, okay, you're working with that person. Okay. You don't say they're a great person if they're not. Oh, I know that person. And then you zip it, right? Don't say anything negative. Don't try to get the person's business. You can try to solicit that agent or that customer's business to buy a house if they have their house listed. Maybe they need a referral on an agent somewhere else. Maybe you call and say, hey, I know you have your house listed with Todd. I'm just calling you to see if you need any services to buy a home. I'm an expert in finding homes around here. I know that's okay to do. I would never personally do it. I just am like, oh my God, we have small enough town. I'm not, if you're in a metro area, maybe that's fine. But in my town, we have a very small town. I'm not going to go bother somebody else's customer about that because I know they're going to hate me afterwards because you know it'll come up and the next time they're talking. But it is okay to do that. You just can't go behind the sign. You can't contact a person's seller. You can't have your wife go contact a person's seller and say, you should talk to my husband. He's such a better realtor than that person. I know they don't have an agency. They don't have a realtor relationship, but just be really careful. We have had all of those things happen in the last year. One of them, I actually complained to the state about because he was doing that. He had his wife going around and calling people and saying, you should work with my husband just got into the business and you should call him. And it's like, he was like, well, I didn't break the rule. I'm like, yeah, you broke the rule. Like, you don't want to do that. And it is okay if a seller calls you and says, I have my property listed with so-and-so. I'm not happy. And I'm looking at getting out. It is okay to talk to that person. And you say, I'm so sorry you're unhappy. Don't say, oh, I know that guy is such a jerk. You say, I'm so sorry you're unhappy. What did they do that you would like another agent to do better? Because you're going to find out red flags, right? You're going to find out, oh, well, I would have done it that way. Maybe the person's a real jerk and they've jumped from, maybe the seller's a jerk and they've jumped from agent to agent. You're going to find out whether you want to do business with them, but it happens all the time. Seller's okay to reach out to you, or even if your friend comes up and says, hey, my friend has so-and-so as their listing agent. He was thinking about reaching out to you. Is it okay if I give him your phone number? Like, heck yeah, call me. But I don't want to reach out to that seller. They can call me, but I'm not going to go and reach out to them. So if the friend says, can you call them? I'd say, have them call me. Just with the relationships that we have, we really have to be careful about the way we do things. And you can have that listing set up for the day the other one expires. You can go and get your photos while it's still listed, but you just can't reach out to that customer. Does that all make sense? That's it. I'm not going to get into any more. I hope it wasn't boring. There's so much good stuff in here, but that's about all I feel like I got to get to my class. That's what I'm trying to say. You guys have any questions before we go?